Okay, guys, again, this video is for the next two slides. I want to now separate out some of the differences in the psychological characteristics of people with bulimia and anorexia. I just talked about some of the similarities. There are some differences as well that we have discovered from researching people with these disorders. First, let's talk about the psychological characteristics of people with bulimia. Number one, a tendency to perceive events as stressful. So I want you to think about this because there seems to be a potential here for those binge periods that I've been talking about to be a way to manage stress, to cope with stress. It's an emotion-focused way to cope. Do you see how many words I have coined that are not words during this lecture? Some researchers have indicated that those binge episodes, those out of control comfort food eating episodes that, as you know, raise serotonin levels in the brain, could be an emotion-focused coping strategy. Remember, we talked about in prior lectures in different contexts the difference between problem-focused and emotion-focused copers. And remember, problem-focused copers tend to focus on how to eradicate the source of stress, whereas emotion-focused copers tend to focus on how to eradicate or eliminate the uncomfortable emotional state created by the stressor. Right? So the idea is that people with bulimia have a tendency to perceive potential stressors as threats. And then when they do, they use emotion-focused coping strategies rather than problem-focused coping strategies to try to cope with the uncomfortable emotions that they are experiencing. Also, another thing that researchers have indicated about people with bulimia that is more common than in people without bulimia is that they have what we refer to as labile mood states. And I've mentioned this in this lecture in prior slides, and I've mentioned it in prior lectures in other contexts, but I just want to remind you what it means. Labile mood means a person's mood state varies considerably, and they shift between intense emotional states, so they have some difficulty regulating their emotions. And typically this labile mood state, where they're shifting rapidly between different emotional states, are typically negative emotions like depression, anxiety, irritability, things that would create discomfort. And again, the idea is that people with bulimia may be using those binge episodes as a strategy to control mood, to regulate mood, because they have these uncomfortable, rapidly shifting emotional states, depression, anxiety, irritability, and these comfort foods, which you know increase serotonin levels in the brain, and they're doing it in high quantity, obviously, are a way to control these rapidly shifting, uncomfortable emotions. People with bulimia tend to be extroverted, so they're sociable. They enjoy being in groups and crowds. They're comfortable in the environment of others. They tend to be impulsive, which is very interesting because, as you know from prior lectures, low serotonin levels are associated with impulsivity. And if those binge episodes typically involve, as they do, the intake of high sugar, high fat foods that raise serotonin levels in the brain, it decreases their impulsivity. Finally, it is common for people with bulimia to be diagnosed with comorbid substance use disorders and personality disorders. You know all about substance use disorders, alcohol and other drugs. Personality disorders in particular, borderline personality disorder, and what is known as histrionic personality disorder. People with borderline personality disorder rapidly shift between emotional states, so that labile mood I mentioned is a characteristic of borderline personality disorder. They have difficulty with emotional regulation. In addition to that, people with borderline personality disorder have extremely low self-worth and low self-esteem, and an excessive fear of abandonment. They are also dichotomous thinkers, interestingly enough, which I mentioned is a characteristic of both bulimia and anorexia. And so again, it's been suggested that the binge episodes, in particular in bulimia, may be influenced in part by the substance use disorders and the borderline disorder. Histrionic personality disorder is characterized by individuals who tend to like to be the center of attention. They need to be the center of attention. They'll often be the ones their friends call drama kings or queens. They're the ones who are always trying to create drama, buzz, interest in their problems. They tend to take over conversations. They're always wanting sympathy from others, that kind of thing. Okay, what about the psychological characteristics of anorexia that are different, that differentiate people with anorexia from people with bulimia? One, unlike people with bulimia who tend to be extroverted, people with bulimia tend to be introverted. They tend to be shyer. They're not comfortable in social circumstances. They tend to be more passive. They tend to lack assertiveness. So they have difficulty letting others know what's important to them or setting boundaries with other people when they don't feel comfortable with relationships, etc. Number two, people with anorexia commonly have obsessive compulsive tendencies. Okay, so people with obsessive compulsive tendencies have thought patterns that repeat and create anxiety and compulsive behaviors or rituals that they do to quell that anxiety. Very orderly. These would be people who, for example, might even alphabetize their pantry closet with their foods in it. They have all of their different color clothes separated in the closet. They have lists, they have order, that kind of thing. And they become very anxious when their rules and order are violated in some way. If they always get up every morning at 8 and have coffee and they wake up at 9, that's very disturbing to them, that kind of thing. And people with anorexia have those kinds of tendencies. And finally, highly conscientious. Highly conscientious. People with anorexia score extremely high, and you guys should be experts at this, right? Because we talked at length in our unit on personality and health about the predictive value of conscientiousness in health and health outcomes. People with anorexia are highly conscientious. They privilege order. They think rules are important. They set specific goals. They are accountable to others when they make a plan and they give their word. Dependable, things like that. And sometimes that results on them being very hard on themselves if they don't meet up to what they believe is important standard that they set for themselves. Okay, so I'm going to end there because I separated out the differences between people with bulimia and people with anorexia in terms of their psychological characteristics. I will meet you on the next few slides to end our lecture today. I will see you soon.